Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Carrow Road. It was billed as a must-win. It felt like a must-win, if only for the atmosphere around this place. And the good news is Norwich City have won it. The final score here today, Norwich City 3, Stoke City 1. And it is a result that everyone around this place, not least Dean Smith, needed. And they've got it. And it feels like a real collective sigh of relief at the end of this one. And it was probably a game with lots of narratives interwoven into it. I'm going to start actually at the back and start at the end and work backwards, if that makes sense. So, because I want to start on positivity. So let's kind of start with, actually I'll start from the beginning, because that makes more sense. You'll lose me if not, and I'll lose myself. So Norwich City going into this game made 6 changes. That's always quite an eye-watering or an eyebrow-raising amount of changes when a team news comes in and you see a team make 6 changes. It's a pretty incredible statement of maybe where Dean Smith felt his Norwich City side was. He said he wanted to freshen it up, felt it needed freshening up. I would concur. Onel Hernandez started, Kieran Dow started. The idea of that was to basically try and get him and Ramsey either side of Stoke 6 and try and find a little bit of space in those particular pockets. Again, theory behind that, absolutely bang on. Sam Byram came in for Max Aarons. Ben Gibson returned. We saw Sam McCallum fit enough to play again, obviously. Angus Gunn in goal. Who else am I missing? Teemu Pukki played. Aaron Ramsey in the 10 with Liam Gibbs alongside Isaac Hayden. And that was how Norwich City lined up in a 4-2-3-1. It was quite a solid midfield 2 and then probably a bit more of a fluid 3 behind Teemu Pukki. And to be honest, if anyone was expecting, as we saw from Dean Smith in his press conference yesterday, pretty combative, pretty willing to defend his record, defend himself. He wanted, if almost he wanted that energy to be installed within his Norwich City team from the get-go. We didn't really see that. It was quite a lethargic start, quite a passive start, I felt, for Norwich City. But by the same token, it kind of felt they were trying to manage everything a little bit, manage the atmosphere in this place, manage the fact that for a whole afternoon, this ground, and understandably so, I'm not criticising anyone, it felt very edgy. And the performance kind of, I felt, reflected that nervousness, and it was quite passive. They didn't move the ball at times. They kind of actually started the game almost like the away side, where they were having to absorb a lot of pressure. Stoke were having the ball and kind of moving them around a bit without really playing within in the final third or placing a huge amount of pressure onto Norwich. But actually, it just felt, the more, and this is a general game point, the more the game kind of wore on, the more Norwich City really got into it and really began to impact it. And you know, they probably needed to do that to an extent because of the feeling and how everything felt around this game and certainly around the head coach. And to be honest, a lot of their performance wasn't particularly great. It was stodgy. It was kind of same old, actually. It was a lot of mistakes, a lot of struggles in possession. The attacking third was quite lethargic and quite players on different wavelengths and a real difficulty to really see a coherence or a fluidity in what Norwich City were trying to do. And that meant that balls got turned over quite a lot, that they had to kind of sit and absorb pressure and look to play on transition. Onel Hernandez provided a thrust, a spark, but probably without maybe the consistency, which is what we kind of associate with him. And so that was kind of the game. Stoke were pretty good, and I felt actually the better team in 2 out of 3 thirds on the pitch, in their third, in the midfield third. In the final third, they probably lacked a little bit of cutting edge. But when Norwich City have the quality they have in attacking areas, they do get opportunities. And it almost felt to me, which is maybe a bit apt given the clocks are going back, but at 1-0, this felt like a game that you could have placed in the middle of their winning run in September, where they weren't playing particularly great, and it wasn't great, but they were winning. Largely maybe because of the opposition's deficiencies. And again, I mean that from a kind of cutting edge perspective from Stoke, who I just felt if they had a little bit of a spark in the final third, probably would have converted what was large swaths of possession into real clear-cut chances. And if they'd have done that, then maybe this game would have transpired differently. Jacob Brown had probably their best chance in the first half, where he connected with a header. I think, to be fair, he did very well to connect with it. And because the ball was at such pace, that those headers are very difficult to control. They didn't manage to do that. Norwich then took the lead through Aaron Ramsey. Liam Gibbs does so well to almost break out of midfield, win the ball, and play Teemu Pukki down the right side of the penalty area. He twists and turns Ben Wilmot, shot across the face of goal. I feel Bursic could probably do better, although it looks like he's unsighted by a defender. but he pushed it into the path of Aaron Ramsey, who at full stretch, it's difficult to control the ball in that situation. Easy to kind of cut underneath it and loft it over the bar, but he managed to strike it pretty true, strike through the middle of the ball, connected with it well, and it ended up hitting the back of the net. And from there, Norwich City, again, didn't really open up in perhaps the way you would expect. It felt like, whilst the goal probably should have lifted this place, there was still a little bit of confliction in here about the performance, about the general mood around the club, which is maybe quite telling. There was a couple of ripples of chanting in the Snake Pit about the quality of their support, and I think it's always our fault line at one point, and a little bit of trepidation, and also the booze, a smattering of booze around the place did set in at 1-0. There were a couple of instances where Kieran Dow gave the ball away in the second half. He was kind of quickly replaced, as Dean Smith was quick and right to point out, let's just lay off him a little bit, because he has just come back from laryngitis. He's a better player than that today, than what his performance reflected. I think there's enough mitigation for us probably to put it down to the illness and kind of what he's been through in the last week or so. But he then went off. Norwich then, again, didn't necessarily have great control on this game throughout, and that's probably this season. I'm struggling to think of too many times, maybe beyond minor short bursts, where they've had real control over a fixture. And again, this wasn't necessarily one of them today. And actually, it was very nervy. And before a double change, that I'll speak about in a moment, Stoke were beginning to feel their way into the game. Nick Powell had a glorious opportunity at 1-0 to Norwich, header at the far post. I don't really know how he's missed it, but obviously I think he's just kind of shut his eyes and hoped for the best, kind of got underneath the ball, and it's gone over the bar. And that was a big moment in this game, because if Stoke would have got that, they had the momentum, they had the wind in their sails, they probably would have gone on and really kind of pushed their foot down the accelerator a little bit more. I actually felt that Will Smallbone, who Alex Neil decided to take off, was a major loss as well when he came off, just in terms of the energy he had, and he was turning the ball over and creating phases of attacking play pretty well. So that helped. I've not seen it back, but people are telling me that Stoke should have had a penalty. They worked a 3-on-2. I actually think the decision initially, I think it was Dwight Gale to put the ball out. I think it was Dwight Gale on the right. I don't know who it was in the middle, but they should have played it to the right. Instead, they played it to the left to Tariq Fosu. He tries to kind of twist and turn Grant Hanley. It did look like there was contact. I'd have to watch it back as to whether or not it was a penalty and whether or not it was in the box. But it looked a foul in real time, is what I'll say. But I'm willing to kind of be corrected that. So scribble that down in pencil, perhaps, rather than pen, so I can rub it out. I'll come back to it later when I've watched it back. But that kind of felt like the moment that maybe the game shifted. There was Dean Smith made a substitution. Onel Hernandez came off. Todd Cantwell came on. Marcelinho Nunez came on as well. And that did shift things. And look, Dean Smith has taken a lot of criticism in recent weeks. Largely, he's the one that's kind of the subject of a lot of the criticism that's been around in Norwich City's losing run. And look, I don't think all of the question marks around Norwich City have been answered today by any stretch of imagination, nor do I think this answer really proves anything. But you have to give him credit when he deserves credit. He deserves credit for that substitution, bringing on Todd Cantwell, bringing on Marcelinho Nunez, bringing on Gabriel Sara. It added a different tempo to Norwich City's midfield. It added a different quality level, to be frank, onto this game. And it won Norwich the game in perhaps more convincing fashion than their performance warranted, in my view. And so he deserves major credit for that, really, because let's be honest, the sub in this place was booed. People were unhappy that Onel Hernandez had been taken off. He's a crowd favourite. That's probably partly to do with it. Todd Cantwell came on, I thought, and actually I felt he'd been hard done by, because certainly at Sheffield United, I thought he was pretty good. Obviously, the nature of the schedule probably means that rotation has to happen a little bit more frequently than maybe you would expect. But he came on and looked inspired. It was the third goal for Sara he was heavily involved with. Second one, Aaron Ramsey again exchanges passes with Tammy Pukki. It's actually a really good move. Ramsey on the edge of the box into Pukki. He flicks it back into Ramsey's pass. Lovely finish. Bursic again maybe could do better, but that put Norwich 2-0 up. And from there, it just felt like everyone in this place had a collective weight lifted off their shoulder, the players included. There was suddenly a little bit more confidence in their play, dare I say a little bit more style to their play, and certainly a little bit more quality to their play as well. And that was really good to see. And you could see it actually in the build up to the third goal. Gabriel Sara, I think Balotelli against it was against Norwich actually, wasn't it, a few years ago, where he shouldered the ball in actually for the build up for the third goal. He shoulders the ball to I think it was who's on the left, Sam McCallum. And Norwich City built their attack from there. Todd Cantwell wins it back. Lovely recovery run to win the ball back. Then plays the ball through to Nunez. From an angle, he does well to get a shot away. Bursic does make a good save. I think it's probably a little bit harsh to be critical of him in that scenario. And Gabriel Sara is on hand to touch the ball into the back of the net. That's 3-0. That's 3 points. That for Norwich City was the most important thing today, even if their performance was maybe lacking in the substance and the style that perhaps some people would have wanted. And look, what does this result do? It eases pressure. That's what it does primarily. That's what Dean Smith needed. That's what Norwich City needed after what's been a really, really tough October, a really tough run of form, where questions have been asked. Like I said, I think all of them have been answered today. And ultimately, now attention will shift on to Wednesday and QPR coming in here. QPR have loftier ambitions, in my view, than Stoke City. They've started the season very well under Michael Beale, although it was pretty ordinary last night against Birmingham. That will be a bigger test of Norwich City's promotion credentials, in my view. But from here, Norwich have of their three games left, 2 of those are home games against QPR and against Middlesbrough before this World Cup break. If Norwich City can win both of those games, they've obviously got Rotherham next Saturday as well on the road. It feels like it's possible for them to get a run together now towards this sort of mini block of games before the World Cup break, and that will just help everyone up the lift. But with that, performances have to follow, because, like we saw earlier on in the season, it is not sustainable to keep winning games like this. And actually, what the final 20 minutes epitomised is why this Norwich City team does get held against such lofty expectations. It's why there is such criticism of them when they don't play well and when they don't move the ball in a certain way, or they don't look a certain way, or they aren't coached a certain way, because everyone knows the quality within that. And I think there's a willingness maybe to say they've been over-criticised for people inside, or there's a view that people have gone too hard too soon. But that is just a reflection of what this group is and what this group should be, which is when it plays like it did in the final 20 minutes of this game, with the individuals on the pitch that it had, in the form that they were in, the confidence that they showed, this team should be doing a lot better than it is in the Championship, and a lot better than it has done since the start of the season. What this needs to be now is the moment that Norwich City are able to turn a corner, and the moment that they're able to look ahead, and the moment that they drag the performance levels up a gear. That is what this needs to be about now. Winning was important today, and it was important to do that kind of in any way that they could do that. But now there needs to be a sustainable view and a sustainable approach as we go forward that improves performances incrementally, that allows them to win football matches on a consistent basis over a 90-minute period. Because what we've seen again here today is a large chunk of this game that was stodgy, that was difficult, that was tough, and a final 20 minutes that was very good, a chunk. We need to see that over 90 minutes before we can really begin talking about Norwich City in perhaps the terms that we've wanted to speak about them all season. That's the challenge now, and that is the challenge that Dean Smith and his players will have to grapple with. But it's an easier challenge under these circumstances than it was in the middle of a really tough run, when this place was ready, and I mean that in the right term, ready to become very difficult, and the whole afternoon was on edge, and rightly so, because of where results have been. And I've been very public on maybe what I feel this team is. I still, watching it even today, I don't feel it's a top 2 team. There's a lot of work that needs to happen before we get to that stage. But this is a step, and it's a step forward when in the last few weeks, every single step has been backwards. That's the positive from today. But like I say, you cannot get too carried away. Stoke came into this game with 2 defeats. They're in a difficult moment. They're in transition. They didn't look particularly great, even though I felt they dominated probably two out of 3 thirds. That's where the concern has to be. So by no means should anyone be, firing fireworks in the sky and going, hallelujah, Norwich City are on the right track again. It's not as simple as that. But this needs to, what the next step needs to be against QPR on Wednesday is a step forward like this one was today. Albeit, I think, a small step forward, it was a step forward. And they've got some catching up to do. Yes, So that was the game. Norwich City conceded late on. Ben Gibson kind of flicked a clearance into Nick Powell's path, wonderful finish, and it finished 3-1. I was probably the only person inside this place that had a smile on my face when that goal went in, and I'll come back to that. But you know, as I was saying, in the context of Norwich City season, what this cannot be is another false dawn, another false start, another moment where this Norwich City side looks like it's now going to kind of, like a car, kind of chug itself into gear. What it needs to be is actually a starting base for improvement and real improvement and tangible improvement in results. And when Norwich City get that and those performances improve, results will be more sustainable, they will be more consistent, and they will follow, and pressure automatically will ease on Dean Smith and his players. And people in this place, there will be no talk about disconnection and anything like that. It's going to be a long process. It's going to be a long healing process. And as you know, even at 1-0 today, it didn't really feel like that. So it's still a long way to go. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm getting carried away with this. I'm just saying, in isolation, in what was needed, Norwich City did that job. I don't think they did much more than that job, and I don't think the job was as convincing as the scoreline suggests. But they did that job, and I think what we saw in the final 20 minutes was a basis for Dean Smith to really work towards. I'm not sure we've seen the Cantwell, Sarr and Nunez trio with Isaac Hayden behind them. There is enough in that final 20 minutes to suggest that could be really positive as the lights go out. And it's now about taking those elements forward and improving them. And that's where this game is. And what this game represents. It needs to be the start of something rather than another false dawn. And we will get a real test of what that is like, I feel, when QPR come to town on Wednesday. Like I mentioned, I did my video verdict at Sheffield United last week. You will all know. So this scoreline, it's funny, isn't it, when something happens in life and something follows it, a circumstance, a moment that just felt like it was kind of meant to happen. And I'm not kind of big on this stuff, this kind of philosophical stuff, but Norwich City winning here 3-1 today. Obviously, as I explained last week, I lost my uncle last Friday. Every week he would go and put a bet on Norwich City, so it feels quite apt that the first game back at Carrow Road since his passing was a 3-1 win. And I know various members of my family, I actually didn't have a bet on it today. I don't really bet. I don't think I've ever put on a bet. I perhaps should have done that because I'd have been quite well off in terms of return. So that was for Trevor. That was for progression, and hopefully it's the start of a bit more of a positive Norwich City run. Thank you all very much for watching from Carrow Road. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. Pinkin.com and the Pinkin Plus app, of course, the place to go for all the latest updates, analysis and reaction to this win. We'll be recording a podcast as well, so look out for that, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Thanks for watching.